My guest this week is Mark Ousley. He is a professor teaching music theory and choral conducting at the University of Oklahoma and is working on his PhD. He is also the host of the Unwokable podcast. And I often say that the problem isn't that the cultural decline is so bad, it's that most people don't realize how bad it is. They don't realize it's everywhere. So I wanted to bring him on to talk about how something he loves that he thought was unifying is being torn apart by wokeness. Here's the first segment of our interview. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here.
It is great to have you. And you want to talk about how our cultural decline is affecting music theory, conducting, and things of that nature. And I just saw a tweet from someone today saying he was addressing Jordan Peterson. He said the first mistake he made is he thinks as woke, which I agree is completely stupid, affects everything. And I said, but it does. Maybe not in the direct way you think, but it does. And so we want to talk about that a bit. But I guess to start, we need to get an understanding of what we're talking about. So talk a bit about what you do, what you teach, what you love, and how you got involved in music theory and conducting and things like that. Because that's not typically something that in today's society, young people go into.
Yeah. I'll say this, for lack of a better term, I kind of grew up as a white trash, very poor kid in Missouri. And I am the first person in my family to graduate high school, first person to go college, much less get a graduate degree and pursue a doctoral degree. And that's not taking anything away from my family, who has worked very, very hard, but that's just the route I went. But the reason I went that route was because of music. I got involved in organized choral music when I was in high school, but had no idea you could do anything with it. And I had a teacher that kind of grew up in the same situation as I did in Georgia, and kind of latched on to me and said, hey, you got a talent. And guess what? You can do what I do. And that kind of blew my mind, and this underscores the power that teachers can have, for good or for ill, on a impressionable mind. I'm so thankful for him, because he showed me a good path that was rooted in good values and also a good discipline, that I could take the talents I had and apply it to actually just paying that forward. And so that got me involved. From that point on, I was going to be a music teacher. Then I got into music ed and did a bachelor's of music education in Mississippi, and then a master's of choral conducting in Oklahoma. And what grabbed a hold of me was the idea that this is a universal language, and in terms of choral music, you have the music that is the universal language actually mixed with an explicit idea, whether it's a Latin mass, or it's African-American spiritual, or it's, a chanson from France, or, whatever it may be. You get to mesh this together. And this is a huge part of our culture, especially in K through 12 and collegiate areas, because choral music is cheap, it's unifying, and it takes students and teaches them how to do something together in a unified way. But what has started to happen here, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, has been this critical turn in all of our culture, right? And that has happened at an alarming pace. And choral music specifically has been almost completely overrun by this social justice message. Right. And it's kind of this attack on Western culture, on Western classical music as being overwhelmingly white. And this has made choral music and organized ensemble music in K through 12 and collegiate schools a propaganda machine. So the teachers are now pushing a political viewpoint that if I would have encountered that at 14 years old with my teacher, I can't say I wouldn't have adopted, because I looked up to him. He was empowering me to say, hey, you can do better than where you came from. And this is how you can do it, through education, through music, through your talents. And so that's kind of how I got into music. And then also here in the last 3 or 4 years during my doctoral work, switched into taking this on directly, the woke machine, as you would say.
Okay. So you said it's cheap and it's unifying. So I don't mean way back. Obviously, we went back to to the beginning, we can talk about why there were limits. But just for those of us who don't understand it, today, let's say from 1970 to today, are there limits to those who don't have whiteness in participating in choral music?
No. Well, no, I mean, not practically. They're making it that way, I guess. Right. But yeah, what has started to happen is that there has been an attack on what they would call the old white guys, right? With Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, moving all up, to mid 20th century music, and even people like Leonard Bernstein and those, as representing this culture of whiteness. Now, whiteness is anything that what I would call a critical Marxist doesn't agree with. And, and that is exemplified for many of the crits, as they call themselves, in classical music. And especially, you had a Philip Ewell, who was a music theorist, directly attacked Beethoven, for example, as being a subpar composer and somebody who represents whiteness in music theory, because there was no, other cultural influences on his music. And so he's representing something that has been used by him and since him to project the patriarchy or project the white culture on society. And so what's happening now, especially in the last 10 years, is that they're taking these figures, whether it's Beethoven, whether it's Heinrich Schenker, who was a theorist, whether it's, Leonard Bernstein or others, and saying these folks, because of the bad things they did, the work that they put out is no longer appropriate to be done by children, by communities, by churches, those kinds of things. And so there's becoming this kind of exclusionary point there.
But you say that there's nothing stopping them from doing it, that there's nothing inherently white about the music. So why is it that it's majority white to begin with?
Well, majority white to begin with. Again,
why are the people who are teaching, and I guess the students of it from a college level, why are they majority white?
Why are they majority? Well, I would challenge that. I'm not sure that that's, especially in the teaching realm, I wouldn't say that is the case. But I will say this: you attach yourself to what you're exposed to as a child, right? I think this is something that's not really explored very often. Philip Ewell is a black man, and he talks about in some of his critiques that he was exposed to classical music at a young age because his father was loved classical music, and his father actually went to Morehouse with Martin Luther King, and he actually goes after Martin Luther King by way of his father, saying, well, both of these men loved classical music. Both of these men loved the established white culture, and they were basically ignorant of the fact that they were being used by white culture. But what he neglects in that summation is that he is a doctoral, has a doctorate in music, and he teaches music theory not because he was immersed in whiteness, but because he was through his father was exposed to classical music at a young age. So I would say the major part of why you don't see more to use the woke term BIPOC, or people of color, or black people, or indigenous people in music, is because they weren't exposed to it as a child. I wouldn't have been involved in classical music. I wouldn't have even liked classical music had I not been at 14 years old, grabbed by a teacher and say, hey, listen to this. This is great. And you may not think you like it, but let's dive into it. And so my eyes were open and expanded because I was exposed to more aspects of things I didn't know. So I think that to go back and just answer your question, I think it has way more to do with what children are exposed to at a young age as to whether or not they get involved in it as they're older. And I think that's across the board. whether that's math, science, social studies, history, all of those things. The classics, rhetoric, argument, the more you're exposed to, the more likely you're going to be want to be involved in it.
Coming up, more with Mark Ousley, host of the Unwokable podcast. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
We return to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer. Once again, here's Charles Love.
Are you tired of summer nights in Maine?
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Mark Ousley, host of the Unwokable podcast. And in this segment, we talk about whiteness. I want to know if they're right. Are there too many whites in music? Is it a bad thing, just the sheer presence of whiteness? Is it something that they do differently? And blacks who conduct and write music, do they use some different black-specific scale of music? So these are the important questions I put to Mark. Is it true? They're saying it's majority white. Is it true? Yes. But is it true because they're being oppressed or excluded? Clearly, that's not the case. Yeah. But then the other thing is, why is that bad? Yeah. So what if the majority of the people doing it are white? So what? If you don't think it should be, then get involved. Mm-hmm. Then change it by being better than, being hired to do it. But the other thing is, this is unique in that the type of music it is, they're saying that the presence of whiteness itself makes it bad, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I've heard a little. I mean, I'm not as astute as you and the people who study this, but I've heard some Beethoven. I've never really heard the Clan Beethoven, where he talked about the greatness of whiteness and in his music, and talked about how black people are inferior. I miss those.
Beethoven was never even exposed. I mean, very little, because you're talking about early, 1800s. When he wrote the third, or for example, or his first symphonies. We're talking about a very closed society where we cannot transplant a 2022 culture back to an 1800 mindset, and we have to realize that they couldn't communicate, and we're exposed to too much of the world. He was, all of his travelings were around the same 200-mile area almost his entire life. And that's just the culture that he was exposed to. And it's also what he studied. And at that point, what people don't understand, too, is that he was a revolutionary, expanding things outward that included other sounds and other ideas, and putting notions of message to unsung music and things like that. All of those things were revolutionary for the time, that if he wouldn't have done it within his own little sphere of influence that eventually expanded out, then we wouldn't have the music we have today. But the other part of it is this. People don't know this, and this is part of what I'm working on in my dissertation, is that Beethoven was directly influenced by Thomas Jefferson. The notion of the Enlightenment and the kind of all men are created equal, that everyone has a right to speak their mind. Beethoven was a product of that directly. It can be directly linked to the American Revolution and the words of the Declaration of Independence. And he wrote that down in sound, because actually at the point by he was writing his major symphonies, the governments that he was under were starting to clamp down and censor people from being able to say things. And so he said, okay, that's fine. You may not let me write an opera that's political anymore, like Mozart did, but I'm going to attach a meaning to a programmatic symphony that tells a story without saying any words, that actually carries the message of the light of liberty and love and beauty for all humanity into my music. And guess what? You won't be able to censor that spirit. And that all came from the Aufklärung and from Jefferson's notion that he was the first one to write down, that spread, like he said later on in 1821 to John Adams, the flames of 1776 have spread over too much of the globe to be extinguished. He was talking about Beethoven. And Beethoven always wrote about fire. And when he wrote about fire, he was talking about the fire of man in the heart, the freedom, the liberty. And that goes into what I think the woke movement wants to extinguish when it comes to music and when it comes to figures like Thomas Jefferson.
So talk about that then. So what are the accusations they make when they attack it? What are they claiming is bad about Mozart or Beethoven or whoever they claim to be this evil whiteness that's in the music?
Well, they will, it depends on the person. I think there's an overarching critique that white Western music is, kind of a example on a broad scale of slavery or colonization because it was simply done at the time that was prevalent in the world. That's one. The other is very akin to what they've tried to do to Thomas Jefferson. And I keep going back to Thomas Jefferson. The piece I'm writing my dissertation on has text by Thomas Jefferson. It was written in 1943 and it was written in support of World War II. And so I can always bring it back. They go after Thomas Jefferson because he was a man who owned slaves, right? And that's an objective fact. We all know that. We can all agree that was not right. We can all agree that we wish he would have made better choices. We can all agree that is a blight on his reputation in general as a historical figure, but it does not discount the other good that he did. And that's what they try to do to composers, is they try to say, okay, well, Handel owned slaves, so we need to stop doing the Hallelujah chorus. We need to stop doing the Messiah. Heinrich Schenker wrote once in his diaries that, white people are dominant over people of color. So we need to stop using his method of dissecting music because he uses the word tonic and dominant or subdominant in it. So they make this kind of specious direct correlation between verbiage and the person or the methods or the thoughts that these people put into the world that were virtuous and try to discount those by way of their failings as a human being. And they do that in a way where they explicitly don't understand that one day people are going to do that to them, right? And Solzhenitsyn said, the line of good and evil, it falls down the heart in the middle of every man. We're all a mixture of bad and good. We've all done bad and good things in our lives, sometimes at the exact same time. But the woke are taking this a step further, saying, because of the evil deeds, we must remove the good that they did from the culture because it's inextricably linked, and it's an example of evil now.
Right.
And that's just, it's a shutting down of thought, and it's an attempt to break down the culture that they want to disrupt and dismantle.
Yeah. And there are other problems too, just practical problems. So I don't have, again, your level of skill, and I don't structure music. So I have it's going to sound, you're probably going to laugh at me. It's going to sound so dumb, but
music belongs to everyone.
But it must make sense. So there are some Black people and other minorities who do what you do, right? You study what you study and all that stuff. And so let's take a Black composer, so, and some of them may be good at what they do, and they may be talented, right? Mm-hmm. Does their approach or the music that they create, is it totally different than all the stuff you white people do? I mean, no. So do they use different structure? Do they put the notes together in a way that only Blacks can do? What do they do to the music that is so unlike anything that tears down the patriarchy because it's so like, wow, I didn't even know you could play those notes together.
Well, I will. Let me add a bit of nuance there because I get exactly what you're saying. They all use this. If you're talking about, let's just talk about Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones is a perfect example. Quincy Jones was an orchestrator, composer. He's an amazing legend for Sinatra, for example. And you can't get much more an extension of whiteness in music when you're talking about Frank Sinatra in the mid 20th century, who expanded big band sound, right? Now, but that was a classical form of music that was just moving down the road. And Quincy Jones was a huge part of creating his sound, but he did it within the structure.
Oh, he didn't use a black structure?
No. Let me say this. I mean, nothing is black or white in music. That's the thing, is that we are these. They all use music theory. They all use quarter notes. They all used half notes. They all used bar lines. They all used.
Wait, whoa! I'm not even. Stop. So how would they tell? So let's say they get rid of all of you and replace them with all blacks.
Mm-hmm.
Like only black composers, only black instructors. They're not really tearing anything down.
Well, what they're tearing down is the inclusion of it, right? They're excluding by including.
Coming up, more with Mark Ousley, host of the Unwokable podcast. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Mark Ousley, host of the Unwokable podcast. But here I make a point that I often make in literature, in that even if you want to replace all the white spaces and all the white writers with black writers to get unique experiences, what people fail to realize is if they're good, they studied the classics, they studied philosophy, they studied the past. So to eliminate that would eliminate the structure that got them to where they were. So you would be eliminating them as well. So I asked Mark if the same goes for music.
First of all, it's an attempt at social segregation. It's Jim Crow 1.0. That's what it is. And they want to be able to control a narrative and a message. So they'll use all of these tactics, whether it's rhetoric, whether it's composition, whether it's structure of language, whether it's music or literature. And they will say, hey, I will decide for you what is good. You read me and I will control what you think. That's what it comes down to. That's just like with and I think I've heard you speak about this 1619 project. It's a reinterpretation with a political goal. And they use race, gender, post-colonialism, whatever they want as a shield to protect their political goal, which is that if they can teach a generation or two of students that everything that is around them is evil, then they can control that generation. And what better to do that with in terms of propaganda or control than literature, than music, than art, because that hits at the heart, right? Not just the mind, but the heart, right? If you don't believe me, try to say the ABCs without singing it. Because you will always sing it, because music grabs the heart and the mind. And when you can unify those two things, as say with choral music, what they're doing now is they're saying, okay, we don't want you to sing Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart because they are an example of whiteness. So now all of the messages that may be in that music are now off limits. So we're going to replace them with the black voice, which is, the way that Nicole Hannah-Jones describes it is you can be a black person and not have the black voice. What she's saying is that now all the music that is being written on this scale are being pushed into schools through curriculum, through DEI offices, through, activist agendas, all has a political message now. It all has a, social justice, oppressor, message to it. And so it's not that they're wanting to take Bach out for Bach's sake. It's not that they're wanting to take Beethoven out for Beethoven's sake. They want his message gone. That's the point. They want, and they're even doing this with African-American spirituals. That's the other part of it too, is that there's an amazing composer, if you've never heard, who died in around 2001, 2002. I got a chance to meet him. His name is Moses Hogan. And he wrote some of the most amazing he arranged African-American spirituals that derived from the Civil War, whether it's Go Down Moses or My Soul's Been Anchored in the Lord, you see less and less of his music being done. And he was just like you had said, was trained classically. He was a pianist. He was a conductor. He was an arranger, a composer. And he mixed that classical training with his culture and his upbringing and what his knowledge of what these things that were passed down to him, and made some of the most amazing music you can imagine that is done by white and black and Asian and African choirs all over the world. And that right there just goes to show you that this message that they're trying to do is a political one. They want to erase this so they can put in their own political message into new music, and then have teachers cram that into the ears of your students so that they make them activists for the cause.
And so why are they doing it?
Why are they doing? To disrupt and dismantle. Because you cannot, I liken this, and my friend James Lindsay talks about this all the time, is we're under a cultural revolution, just like Mao in the 60s. And you want to destroy the four olds, and one of those is old history, old customs, old language, you want to destroy the things that connect you to the roots of what made your country what it is today. And that's why they go after Jefferson. That's why in 2000 they were saying we should rip down the Jefferson Memorial, because Monticello is a good enough monument to him, and it shows that, hey, it shows where his plantation was and that he owned slaves, so that's good enough, so let's rip this down. Ignoring the fact that the Jefferson Memorial was erected and dedicated in 1943 with these words on the wall: "I swear upon the altar of God to declare eternal hostility on any tyranny over the mind of man." That was his message, and it was erected in direct defiance to Nazism, which is the establishment agreed to example of fascism, racism, and murder the world has ever known. So they want to rip down a monument, not to a man, but to his message, to his ideology, to his way of thinking about the world, that all men are created equal, regardless of the color of their skin. They want to rip that down so that they can highlight the fact that he owned slaves. It makes no sense.
Coming up, more with Mark Ousley, professor of music and host of the Unwokable podcast. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Mark Ousley, host of the Unwokable podcast. And in this segment, we talk about the people who have good intentions, who really think that they're helping, but they don't understand how bad the movements really are. They just think these people are trying to fix things. So we talk about the professor that got him involved and made him unwokable, and the problem with the way they try to fix things, including the double-blind auditions.
Philip Ewell is actually who got me started on this. Right after George Floyd happened, literally June of 2020, I took a class called The Pedagogy of Music Theory in the 21st Century. And the very first class I took, consisted of a YouTube video lecture from Philip Ewell, and it was about the whiteness in music theory. And I listened to that lecture and found myself getting incredibly angry, because he was attempting to make specious connections to the faults of human beings that created some of the ways that we think about music structure in order to dismantle the structure. And here's the point. He doesn't really talk about what to replace it with. What he talks about is we must do this because it is evil. All while, keep in mind, this is a classically trained music theorist that is actually benefiting directly from the, quote, whiteness that he wants to dismantle. And so it's a suicidal endeavor as well. It's amazing to me how some of these critical music theorists or critical music educators are literally seeking to destroy the house that they're living in, and that, makes them money and has given them a career and has actually in their own lives helped them make their lives better. And that right there is perfect evidence that this is not what they claim it to be. If you're going to destroy your own house in the name of saving it, something's very off there, right? I think some of them do it with a knowledge of what they're doing. And then I think some of them do it because they've had their empathy weaponized against them to think that either they think this way or they're not good people. And if they can do that to adults, think about what they can do to children.
And the important thing too there is people who are kind of like, well, I just thought I was helping. That's what I try to point out to people. Like, let's assume you're right. I give them the argument. It doesn't even work. But you remember when they wanted to, they thought that it was inequality, it was everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And they found some inequality in the musicians in the orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
So they said,
New York Philharmonic. Yep.
Yeah, so we need to fix this by getting more BIPOC people. So how do we do that? Well, you know what we're going to do? And this shows just how woke they went, because this is before the woke, right? This is pre-woke woke. So they said, well, we want to have blind auditions. Mm-hmm. That way that you can't go picking the whiteness, and you'll pick the person, whoever sounds the best, and then we'll have more BIPOC people. It'll be great. And even other people who are opposed to wokeness back then will be like, okay, sounds fair to me. Let's do it. Yeah. So they did it, and they found out that over time they did this new practice. Nobody could see them. All they did was listen to music. And lo and behold, the number of women increased a little bit, but the number of BIPOCs didn't change at all. Yeah. Right? We didn't get more Blacks and more Asians and more, Hispanic.
Well, you got more Asians.
You got more Asians, yeah. But the Asians were already overrepresented, though.
Right.
Right. Well, so you didn't get much. So if the Asians were 3% of the population, they was 28% of the thing. They were still around 28%. So you got more, but it didn't increase because it was blind, is what I'm saying, right?
What you got was better orchestras.
Yeah, that's good. Here's the best part. Here's the best part. It worked. What they wanted to do worked. They got the better orchestra. But then they're like, wait a minute, we didn't get more BIPOCs. So what did the woke version recently say that we should do? Mm-hmm. We should scrap the blind audition. Double blind audition. It didn't work because our goal wasn't better orchestras. The goal was blacker orchestras. But let's not go back to the old. What they had to fix it with was just open racism and say, let's just pick the best Black of the final three. So the final three, the Black guy is the least talented of the three. Pick him anyway because he's Black. So it always comes full circle, because if they're honest with what they're trying to do, it won't work. So then they have to be dishonest.
Right. That's exactly right. And that is one of the most stark examples of how, because I wouldn't say that I think the double blind audition is an example of merit-based play, right? It is, and that's the thing that shows you that music is, I'm going to say it, it's going to be colorblind. Music is colorblind because you can objectively hear whether a choir is good or bad, whether an orchestra is good or bad, whether a player is good or bad or better than, without ever knowing the gender or race of that person. And I think Daryl Davis is, Daryl Davis, if you know him, he's a musician, and he talks about this too. Music reaches beyond, right? And you can tell a good musician by somebody who's playing well, and you don't need to see them. And I think that was perfectly in line with Martin Luther King's, not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And character breeds work ethic, and work ethic breeds product. And you get that with a player or a singer or a conductor. You know what I mean? A conductor you kind of have to see, but you can tell if you hear an orchestra, you can tell how good the conductor is, because the conductor is the interpreter, the player of that orchestra, so to speak. But this is the most stark example of the fact that they don't want equality. They want equity, and they want to manufacture that on the front end of the process through discriminating against people who they don't like the way they look. It's Jim Crow 1.0.
Coming up, my final segment with Mark Ousley, host of the Unwokable podcast. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. I've reached my final segment with Mark Ousley, host of the Unwokable podcast. And we end by talking about what happens to the quality of the music in the long run when you have benevolent whites, as I call them, infiltrating the music and teaching the future teachers with books like, he mentioned the professor at Michigan State University who teaches music education for social justice. And we talk about what that will portend for music in the future.
I love the fact that you use the word benevolent, because all of this is a certain amount of despotism. You know, they're depositing an ideology on people. And this is what Beethoven dealt with in the early 1800s, was this switch from benevolent despotism in Austria to a direct tyrannical despotism after Alexander the Great. There was this whole movement of what they called benevolent despotism, which actually gave people rights, free speech, you know, but they deposited it to the people as if they had the authority to do so, right? And that is what they're doing now. And that will always, history has shown that benevolent despotism will be corrupted and it will turn into a tyrannical, direct despotism. That is what they're doing here. She's masking her white supremacy. It's very much Robin DiAngelo, right? Robin DiAngelo's books are all confessions of her own racism. And you see these usually white, upper middle class academics in education, especially, adopting that mentality. And it is white supremacy. Yep. And they don't seem to be able to either understand that, or they figured out they can profit off of it without it being thrown back on them, right? And so, I mean, you hit it right on the head right there. Benevolent despotism. So
let's end by talking about the Unwokable podcast, why you started the podcast, what you talk about, and what we need to do to push back against this direction that they're trying to take the music.
Just recently, I've been kind of starting it up here for the last 6 months, but I really started pumping stuff out here in the last few months. I was very lucky to have my first podcast with James Lindsay, who's been a good friend of mine. I've been working with him for a couple of years behind the scenes. I've been really involved in Oklahoma, especially the University of Oklahoma, where I'm getting my doctorate, in trying to identify diversity, equity, and inclusion as kind of this enforcement arm of CRT's, ESG, social justice ideology in our systems. And so that's what I talk about on the Unwokable podcast. I do everything from music to, we talk about school choice. We talk about, I like to have conversations but centered around this issue that we have in society that's trying to disrupt and dismantle what we built as a country. And so I created Unwokable because, honestly, my son likes somebody on YouTube called Unspeakable, and I was like, wait, hey, I can get that in. That's what I want to be. I'm against the tyranny of the mind of man. So you can find me on YouTube at the Unwokable podcast there, on Twitter at ACS Against CRT. And then I have a Substack called the Unwokable Substack. It's unwokable.substack.com. And my goal for all of these platforms is to inform people at a grassroots level what is happening in their local and state and federal institutions in terms of this ideology that wants to take over society and how we can fight it. And so that's my goal. I've been real blessed to have the opportunity to be on shows like yours. And again, thank you for having me here and help get the word out. And I just really appreciate you and everything you've done for people like myself to come on and talk with you.
He is Mark Ousley. He is a doctoral candidate in choral conducting at the University of Oklahoma and the host of the Unwokable podcast. Mark, Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Charles. Appreciate it.